I don't know if any of you are gamblers. Personally, I'm not much of a gambler. But let's think in terms of gambling just for a moment. And let's suppose you went to Las Vegas for a little vacation and you decided to go to the casino and play a little blackjack, for instance. And let's suppose you played blackjack 7 times. And unfortunately, you lost $5 each time. Perhaps that's a not so subtle hint to you that maybe you should give up your gambling. Well, how much money did you lose altogether? Wasn't your total loss 7 times? You lost $5 each time. Your total loss would be $35, wouldn't it? Could we express that in an arithmetic statement? Maybe something like this. 7 times you played the game, and you lost $5 each time. Well, wouldn't losing $5, isn't that what we've been thinking of as a negative when you lose or you owe? Wouldn't it make sense to think of that as a negative? And what did that equal? Well, that equaled a loss of $35. I don't know if you're familiar with this representation to indicate multiplication. When you simply write 2 numbers side by side and you enclose one of the numbers, at least in parentheses, you are indicating that multiplication is taking place between those 2 numbers. So we have a positive times a negative equals a negative. And that makes sense just from this logical, common example. If you played the game 7 times, you lost $5 each time you played, you lost a total of $35. Positive number times a negative number gives a negative result. Well now, how much money did you have? How much money did you have before you started playing the game? Before you started playing blackjack for those 7 times. In other words, if we could go back in time 7 plays of blackjack, you had $35 more than you have now after playing 7 times, don't you? You would have had $35 if we could turn back time. If we're Superman and we can get out and fly around the earth and cause it to spin backwards, or we're Star Trek or whatever science fiction that can somehow go back in time. One of the older ones was The Time Machine, a book written by H.G. Wells many, many years ago. If we could go back in time 7 plays, you'd have $35. If we could go back in time the 7 times that you lost $5. Now, how could we express as a number going back 7 plays? Wouldn't that be -7? Wouldn't that indicate going back the 7 times that you played blackjack? And each of those 7 times that we're going back, you had lost $5. And you would have $35 more than you have now, which indicates to us that a negative times a negative, if we think of it that way, produces a positive answer. The negative is like going back 7 times. And each time you had lost $5. So how much money did you have before you started playing those 7 times? You had $35. If you had played blackjack 15 times, you had played blackjack 15 times. We go back 15 plays, and you had lost $2 every time you played. Then doesn't that mean before you started playing, you had $30 more in your pocket than you have now? Going back in time, that's going negative in time. So a negative times a negative makes logical sense to be a positive answer. if we can relate it to this idea of playing games of chance and losing money each time we play. So what we end up with when it comes to multiplying positive and negative numbers, a positive times a negative results in a negative answer. And a negative times a negative results in a positive answer. And what's interesting is not only does this pattern for these situations, positive times a negative giving a negative, negative times a negative giving a positive, not only does do these patterns fit for multiplication, but also for division. It's the same way. If we have a positive divided by a negative, it's a negative answer. If we have a negative divided by a negative, it's a positive answer. So when it comes to multiplication and division of positive and negative numbers, these rules guide us, and this explanation helps us understand why the two negatives indeed produce a positive answer.